Money, money, money. All right. That's what everybody wants to talk about is money. How do I make it? One of the most asked questions I get, well, not even to me, but my parents or Courtney or just people are always curious, how do I make money as a professional triathlete? Because triathlon is this weird niche sport that is not quite like football, baseball, soccer that has this super high media presence, even though it's getting there, but it's not, this super fringe sport, maybe like curling, and not to hate on curling, but just some of these other ones that maybe aren't as participated in. But triathlon kind of sits in the middle where it gets some good coverage, but it's very participation based at the beginning. That participation base also is pretty high earning in some aspects, and just creates this cool little niche sport that creates a lot of opportunity for professionals. So for how I make money, I break it up into 3 different areas. The first one is prize money. This is the most obvious one. You can look it up online. Most races have what their sponsorship money actually is listed out. Whether it's Ironman, Challenge, PTO, they're all pretty straightforward and it's pretty public knowledge. And there's some people even who gather, top prize earners, top 100, top 50 prize earners for the entire year. And that list is usually pretty accurate. There's some more domestic races that might get overlooked that, maybe haven't been added here or there, but it gives you pretty good idea of how triathletes might earn throughout a year. And you get, maybe some top guys earning in the 6 figures all the way down, kind of to people earning just a handful here or there. And, just like any sport, triathlon has those high earners, and then you have people trying to break through and who are maybe, not as high up on that prize money list. And a lot of times I kind of compare it because MLB has a very, kind of tiered structure in having like AA ball in the minor leagues, and then going up to MLB players where, top players are earning a whole bunch. And that's kind of how triathlon is. There's just not these clear-cut lines throughout the entire list. So there's no separate leagues necessarily, even though now we have a pretty good distinction of tiered races with Continental, World, and WTCS races for the triathlon, the World Triathlon Circuit and the Olympic Circuit. And then for PTO stuff and middle distance, you might have some smaller Ironman races and challenge races building up to the World Champs and the top level of the PTO races and the PTO Opens. The second category is sponsorships, and this is working with brands as you get going in the industry. You may get a little bit of prize wins underneath, because when it comes down to it, winning is how you make money with the prize money aspect, and it's how you get some notoriety. And while you could get into some nitty gritty of you can get brands without winning, but it makes your job a lot easier in negotiating and everything if you win races and get on the podium. And the way it's structured usually is a contract will have a base structure, and so it's like a mini salary, and so you kind of pull your sponsorships together, and your base salary is kind of a guaranteed money throughout the year. And I got some good advice early on is to try and have that base money build up enough to be a really solid salary, kind of be able to support yourself, and then the prize money is kind of extra money in the bank. And that way, you're not reliant on always chasing the races, and it takes away some of the stress of needing to perform and getting into the mindset of I want to perform and I want to win rather than I have to, which is not always the best way to go about it. And what's interesting about contracts is you have that, and then a lot of times there's a bonus structure involved with rewarding winning races, and that's kind of the main aspect of it. So if you get podium performances, you get some extra money on top of the prize money and the base money that you might earn through those contracts. And those can even be creative as well. And sometimes they reward for helping to sell the product through affiliate codes or social posts, or you can be kind of creative, and some brands are creative and wanting to do different things than others that maybe are more traditionalist, but very basic contracts are base and then bonus. It really changes throughout your careers when you're working. Like a lot of pros, you start off and all you can ask for is equipment because that's all you've really earned at the moment. But as you move up, your value gets higher and you can ask for a little bit more. more. Sometimes contracts are just bonus money, and then sometimes, it's just a salary. So that's where I think the sport is kind of at, and it's interesting because pros sometimes can't really talk about their contracts all the time. There's some NDAs, or there's some don't really talk about this clauses. Although it would kind of help, because you don't want a top athlete underselling themselves and then pushing everybody down the ladder, making less money overall. You want high-valued people to be, and high-value athletes to be taking top dollar and negotiating well. And so get into that a little bit later, but that's kind of where spending a little maybe on an agent helps with those negotiations. But that's where contracts really brings in the business side of the sport, whereas earning prize money and racing in that first category is really just the true essence of the sport. You're there to win, and you're rewarded for that. Then when you bring in the contracts, that's kind of your entrepreneurial spirit in how can I negotiate these to get the maximum value and also bring the maximum value to my brands, because that's super important, because if you're not bringing any value, there's no point in having this agreement at all. And when you look at that prize money list that I mentioned earlier, you'll see a good majority of guys on the top end and girls have already established really good contracts. And so they're making maybe double the prize money, maybe a third of that in contracts. So it's kind of hard to tell, because I said we can't really talk as much about it, but you hear some things. But then on that prize money list, there might be somebody who had a breakout year and their contracts are way lower, and that's prize money that year is a majority of what they earned, which is somewhat similar to what happened to me in 2017 when I broke onto the scene with an Island House win, a second at 70.3 Worlds. That prize money was huge for me, which brought along, the good contracts. So that's where, maybe if you don't always have the results, you can negotiate better contracts, and it's really finding that value. And there are people across the board, who are really good at showing value to the companies, and so maybe their contracts are bigger than their prize money. And then there's people on the flip side who are really good at racing, but maybe not as good at negotiating contracts, so prize money is a majority of the earnings. And then you have people in between who have found kind of a happy medium, which is a great place to sit as well. So that kind of covers, kind of the two main areas, I would call it, when you're looking at what a professional triathlete earns. But then you have this kind of third category that I like to call the miscellaneous. And this is a catch-all. It's a little bit of a lazy category, but it involves everything from, social media earnings, YouTube earnings. It includes maybe selling equipment from old sponsors. You have to be careful with this, with current sponsorships, that one, you're not using old equipment, which you wouldn't want to do, but also can't really sell current equipment if it says don't sell it there. So that one could be hit or miss. And then there's speaking engagements. There's some athletes coach. Some athletes work another part-time or full-time job if the triathlon prize money and sponsorship categories don't cover that. So it's kind of this catch-all that rounds out the professional triathlete's earnings, because it's a huge kind of umbrella to try and talk generally about. I would say for me, a big majority comes from, the prize money and contract aspect, if we're going to talk a little bit more specifically, with, a little bit coming from that miscellaneous. But if you wanted to include professional triathletes as a whole, you can't skip out on that miscellaneous aspect, because that is, there with 600 pros or 500 pros that have their pro card in the US alone, that's a huge category, and a widespread kind of abilities, race results, and all of that. So just, I guess, to sum up, since this is my YouTube channel, our YouTube channel, and it's maybe a bit more specific to me, triathlon has this unique kind of viewership. I like to think it's like the golf of the endurance world. Maybe that's a bad analogy, maybe not, but in golf, a lot of the times people like to buy clubs to get extra yardage. A lot of times triathletes like to buy speed and buying bikes, shoes, and that creates this unique environment, especially when you do have triathletes who can be high earners who are involved in the sport. And as the sport evolves and the PTO has come in, it's built off of that and created this really cool viewership where I can earn a living based off of sponsorship money and prize money alone. So that's kind of it in a nutshell. There are some really great pros. If you search like how I make money as a professional triathlete, they have some YouTubes or blog posts up about like the nitty gritty of their financials. They open that up, which is super cool to everybody. But this video is a little bit more about just the general aspects of it with a little bit of maybe a few specifics about me. But if you do have any more questions, drop a comment, let me know. And thanks guys, because that's how we make the money in professional triathlon.